Hi there, this is Nick, and my partner Jessica and I are going to be presenting on week 6 of Spatial Ecology lecture and reading materials. This week's material focused on habitat loss and habitat selection. There are 3 different concepts of habitat loss that we examined. The first is what most know as habitat loss, when an area becomes uninhabitable for one species. Habitat fragmentation is habitat loss resulting in larger continuous habitat being broken into smaller or more isolated pieces. Habitat degradation, however, is the worsening of habitat quality, and this will not necessarily cause reduction in the occupancy or abundance of species present. An example of habitat loss is when forests are clear-cut. This habitat loss results in arboreal species like bats and roosting birds losing their habitat. But habitat is then created in the understory for animals like salamanders and insects. An example of fragmentation is a matrix of habitats being separated into smaller pieces, with the matrix being different than the original habitat. An example of degradation is some species may prefer degraded habitats, like insects, bats, and birds congregating around an artificial light source as opposed to a real one. These 3 trees describe the 3 habitat types. Fire can cause habitat loss. Tree disease, or loss of leaves, can fragment the habitat associated in the canopy, and trees dying, on the right, can degrade the habitat present. A real-world example of this is habitat fragmentation caused by roads in Northern California. This affects the silver-haired bat. A 2014 study investigated how anthropogenic roads affected the bat's population use. Using abundance found from acoustic readings of bats, it was found that bat activity was halved when recorded near roads relative to their abundance 300 meters away from the roads. In this case, the habitat was fragmented and degraded by the roads. What causes a lot of this? Humans are mostly to blame for habitat degradation, loss, and fragmentation. Fire is especially a huge driver, and its mismanagement. A 2016 measure reported that humans had started 84% of wildfires and are responsible for 44% of the burned area. Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, known as TEK, better manages fires to not suppress, but instead to allow them to occur more frequently and less intensely. However, Western management does the opposite in fire suppression.
Now we're going to talk about habitat selection theory, which includes optimized habitat selection and maximized habitat selection. Optimized habitat selection is species select the habitats that deliver them the most fitness or what is most optimal for them. The maximized habitat selection is when species aim to take as much as possible from the habitat and occupy the most area. Maximize is unrealistic because animals have limited energy and time, face risks when they're outside. Ideal free distribution is a theory that assumes animals are free to move about in habitats, have perfect information on habitat suitability, and homogeneous individuals have equal competitiveness. Habitat suitability is a measure of fitness a species fulfills when residing or extracting from a certain habitat. The reading we did this week was called Effects of Habitat Loss and Fragmentation on Amphibians. This article was about habitat loss and fragmentation and how it is the largest threat to amphibian population. There was conservation strategies listed in this article, but they were limited because of the lack of species-specific knowledge. The first one was specific predictions to be applied to unique situations involving specific species and situations. There was another one called, which was protecting core areas based on limited adult migration and adult philopatry. And the third was landscape level and population-based approaches. Conservation strategies could benefit from taking multi-scale and landscape scale approach that combine knowledge of species with broad evaluations of the area and accessibility of all necessary habitat types.